I was born and I was young in the war. I didn't consider the war as a political event or a political struggle. It was, of course. When I read the first newspaper that I ever did read, when I was about 6 years old, I read the story of 2 little boys who'd been wartime evacuees, sent out to farms all over England, and these little kids from London and from the great cities were supposed to work for the farmers in return for being bedded and fed. And these 2 kids that I read about were neither given sleep nor were they given food, but they were worked as if they were beasts of the field. And they were starved as a punishment if they hadn't worked as the farmer required. And they were forced to go out in the winter and dig with their bare hands to find winter turnips to have something to eat. And he beat them so severely when he found out that they'd robbed his turnips, as he put it, that they died. When I read this, I didn't think of this as being a political question.
Yes.
And when I read of the attack on Suez, I was outraged by it, and so was my brother. I didn't think of this as a political event. Because at this time, I hadn't come into contact with political parties, or a political organization, or a political movement. I wasn't at that time even in drama school, so I didn't know how you come into politics. In fact, politics came into me. And I wanted to do whatever I could. I didn't know what to do. But I read that there were certain organizations that were collecting clothes and getting food in canteens for the refugees that were coming out. I would have liked to have gone over there and fought, but I didn't know how to get over there, and I didn't know how to fight, and I wasn't trained to nurse, so I knew I was useless in that way. So I went along to one of these organizations, and I left drama school for the term. I told the staff that I couldn't continue with the course, and went and helped sort clothes out.
What did acting mean to you when you first began?
Well, I began acting when I was 6. It was during the war, and there wasn't anything that my brother and I could do, generally speaking, because we were in the country, we were evacuated. There was a radio show once a week that we listened to, and we used to listen to the news every day. And I used to read, because I learnt to read when I was 4, so I could read a lot. So what we used to do was play, and really acting at that point was pretending to have what you haven't got. And then later on, it was possible to see my father in plays, and they were mostly in Shakespeare. So my conception was of being able to take part in great events, the recreation of great events, even though at that time I wasn't involved and very far from, as I felt it, from any great events at all. But you see, I always took it for granted that I would act or I would dance, because my family have acted for generations and generations, so it never occurred to me that I would do anything else. I went to see my first play when I was 5, and I was taken backstage by my father. The set was the set of a castle, and at the back of the set was a balcony, a parapet, and my father was thrown off it in the course of the play. And I was 4 then, and I was taken backstage to be shown the mattresses down below so that I wouldn't be frightened when they threw him over the wall. So I just always thought this was the world that I would go on living in.
What influence did your father have in you?
He's had a very big influence on me. What would you like to know about him?
I'd like to know about his influence on your work, on your profession.
Well, he trained me, though I didn't realize at the time that he was training me. I worked with him twice when, in the early years, professionally. And I learnt very, very important lessons about acting and the actor from working with him. And later on, I learnt more about him and learnt more about what the contribution that he'd made to my work.
How long have you been working with him?
Well, I worked with him first in a play in London. And I was very thrilled and proud that I was in this play. I was living in his flat, the family flat at this time. And we used to walk to rehearsals every morning and walk back from rehearsals every evening. And this gave us an opportunity to discuss the day's work and to consider what we'd been doing that day, what we'd achieved, the company had achieved, not just him and me, and problems that had arisen during the course of the day, and consider how to tackle these problems tomorrow. This is a very important part of professional work, as it is a very important part of political work, to be able to consider each day what developments have taken place and how you're going to do what you're going to do tomorrow. How you're going to change what you've been doing if it seems necessary. And my father is a very special actor. There are many other actors who could be said to outstrip him in this and that and the other. But he has a quality which is the quality of acting that I always aimed for. And this is that he feels very deeply about what he's thinking about. And he thinks very deeply about what he's doing, about what the play is about his part in the play, about the significance of the events that take place in there. But when he comes to perform, and at his very best, whether it's in Shakespeare or whether it is in a modern play, it seems to be purely spontaneous, what he is doing. He seems to be living that moment, and the words that he's saying seem to be said for the first time, not to have been written in a script, not to have been considered, but to be coming from a living human being who actually is in the middle of the struggle that is taking place only on a stage, but is taking place because that human being has put themselves into it. This is the quality that in fact made him a great actor, and the quality that millions of people have responded to when they see him, and do respond to when they see him on the stage. He's still acting.
Yes.
He's just about to go off on a tour now of Shakespeare, and I saw him last year for the first time for 4 years on the stage. And he recited one of Shakespeare's sonnets, one of the most well-known of all the sonnets, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" You know this very well, I know this very well, there's millions who know it very well.
Yeah.
And when he began to speak it, it was as if nothing had been preconceived about it, but it just came out of him, and every word was shining, full of life and light. I don't know what words to use. I can't imagine it being said more simply and more perfectly, and completely stripped of all efforts of actors to say things in a certain tone of voice and present them in a certain way, with great thought and with great feeling. It was really remarkable. I was born and I was young in the war. I didn't consider the war as a political event or a political struggle. It was, of course. When I read the first newspaper that I ever did read, when I was about 6 years old, I read this, but they were worked as if they were beasts of the field, and they were starved as a punishment if they hadn't worked as the farmer required, and they were forced to go out in the winter and dig with their bare hands to find winter turnips to have something to eat, and he beat them so severely when he found out that they'd robbed his turnips, as he put it, that they died. When I read this, I didn't think of this as being a political question.
Yes.
And when I read of the attack on Suez, I was outraged by it, and so was my brother. I didn't think of this as a political event, because at this time I hadn't come into contact with political party. Story of two little boys who'd been wartime evacuees, sent out to farms all over England, and these little kids from London and from the great cities were supposed to work for the farmers in return for being bedded and fed. And these two kids that I read about were neither given sleep nor were they given food.